It is Thursday, November 30th, 2017, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the temporary host of this very, very delayed program. I am so sorry. The rail system in America is garbage, and I am at the mercy of it, and so it took me a little while to get here. But I will say, in what, the 4-5 years we've been doing the show, I've only been late on the train twice. We are so sorry it took us so long to get going, but here we are. Not a moment to waste. As I mentioned before, my name is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMA Fighting. To my left is Jeff Wagenheim of The Washington Post. There is Danny Segura of MMA Fighting. And at the very end, trading places here, Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd style, is Chuck Mindenhall of The Ringer, as well as MMA Fighting.
At least your train didn't hit a tree.
It certainly did. It did happen to you. I forgot about that. But they're fairly infrequent. Yeah. Now, getting up here is tough, boys, but it's not as tough as it is to be a UFC fighter. You know what else is really tough? Toyo Tires is tough. We have to thank our good friends over at Toyo Tires. By the way, everyone, that's why Toyo has been a proud sponsor of the UFC. Just like the UFC fighters, Toyo Tires are built for battle. It's an all-or-nothing philosophy. Durability, aggressive design, on- and off-road capabilities, yes to all of them. Living life on the highway, Toyo has you covered. Spending some serious time off-road, they have a tire for that too. No matter what you drive, Toyo has what you need. And frankly, these tires just look cool. Any vehicle, any terrain, all or nothing, Toyo Tires. The next time you need tires, ask for Toyo. Big thanks to our friends over at Toyo Tires. Okay, we are late. Let's get going. A lot to get to. As I mentioned, I'm filling in for Ariel Helwani because he is in Detroit. And why is he in Detroit? He's in Detroit for UFC 218. Let me say something about UFC 218, if I may. What a breath of fresh air this is. It is not making a ton of headlines. I mean, it's getting the standard media beat coverage, but you don't see any rivalries. The fighters aren't talking smack. A little bit, I suppose, between Ngannou and Overeem, but really just competitive talk. Yeah. Nothing very sinister. And yet, if you look at the card, if you have any degree of education about the sport, you can't wait for Saturday. It is stacked with great fights. It is exciting, but it is quiet. Do you share my sentiment, Jeff Wagenheim, that this is just the kind of respite that we need?
Well, I mean, I guess you can call it a respite. I don't know. It seems as though the UFC has scheduled fight cards on, what is it, like 11 fight cards in a 10-week span or something along that line. And so it feels like there's not really a respite. It's just that they can't get people excited every single. It's like these.
You are such a gloomy person.
No, it's like when these. It'd be like we've talked about the Ultimate Fighter and how those people to compete in that house have to keep making weight in a kind of a way that they typically wouldn't if they were in a real fight career. It's almost like that with the fans. I mean, you're all excited about one week, and then all of a sudden, the next thing you got another one, then you got another one. So it's a little bit, so I think that's what it is. We're just sort of riding this little crest, and there's some excitement, of course, but not enough to really get people going. And let's not forget, there's also fights on Friday night as well.
Which we'll get to later.
But I mean, that's the thing. There's 2 fight cards and, not that much excitement about them.
Yeah, this is a great card. And I was telling Chuck before the show started, I feel like this 4 years ago would have done amazing on pay-per-view, and it would have been like a huge card because these are great fights. And I feel like it's catering, to an audience that, that's a bit more knowledgeable about the sport, that knows who these people are. And this is a fantastic card. And the matchups, for a while we saw a lot of even pay-per-view main cards and just main cards in general have a lot of fighters that were making their debuts that, that were perhaps not that well known. But here we got, the top guys of each division, even the women's fight, we got Tisha Torres and
Michelle Watterson,
Michelle Watterson. So, all these fights are stacked. They involved, if I'm not mistaken, every single fighter on the main card is ranked. So, a great fight card, can't complain.
Now, I would have liked it a lot better, obviously, if Frankie Edgar had made this his appointment, because to me, that fight was going to be like, I was really looking forward to that fight. It's almost in the way that you were looking toward Nurmagomedov against Tony Ferguson, because you just knew, Frankie Edgar had beat so many guys except Jose Aldo, for the last few years, and then you've got, Holloway, who's on the streak. I wanted to see that. There was a little bit of disappointment. I don't know if this plays into what you're talking about a little bit, but the rematch between Aldo and Holloway, just because we've seen it was fairly one-sided in the first match, the way that it went down, that took a little bit off of it. But I think when you look at it as a whole, it's one of those great cards in the sense of, back in the day, you would get a pay-per-view and there was if you paid attention to the sport, there was a lot of intrigue, and there was various layers of intrigue, and I felt like this card has that. You know, you got that. It's one of those baton-passing heavyweight fights where you're like, okay, if Francis gets by Overeem, suddenly you have a true contender, a guy that you know, what would that be, like six fights in the UFC, a true heavyweight contender who's right there to, you know, maybe challenge Miocic. You got Holloway, who's like on this crazy streak. If he does it again, you know, there's just stuff like that. And then, of course, you got Justin Gaethje. I mean, I was talking to you on the radio show, Justin Gaethje and Alvarez, which to me could be fight of the year. So, I mean, if you look at it like that, you can get very excited about the depth of the card and the many layers of it. I just think that kind of the tinkering at the top might have taken a little shine off.
I mean, I would say, though, that in a way I would kind of disagree with you about that main event, and that I was also, like you, disappointed that Frankie Edgar couldn't make it. But I don't know, I sort of wanted to see Aldo again with this guy because we saw Aldo fighting for all these years, just unstoppable. And then he goes out there and he has that fight against McGregor where he's stopped in 13 seconds. You know, you can say what you want about that, but I don't take that much away from it. And then he goes out in this fight against Holloway and loses, and it's like, did that really happen? Is this really where Jose Aldo's at right now? So now we have a chance to see that again. They're going to run it back, and if Holloway could do the same thing to him, we'll be like, okay, now we know that Aldo is down on this downward path.
It was the fresh blood, because if you really look at the featherweight division, the UFC, or even WEC, Jose Aldo has literally been in every fight except for the one makeshift Toronto one when they made an interim belt between Pettis, which ended up being one-sided for Holloway. It's the only time that he's not been involved in a featherweight fight. Even though he was 1-2 in his last, it's just a weird scenario, you know what I mean? Right. And that just adds this weird dimension to it. Like, Jose Aldo, if it's a title fight, Jose Aldo's in it. So here he is again. But you do want to see him because he's always looked better in a second time against guys. Chad Mendes was a good example, and Frankie Edgar, whom he schooled pretty well the second time. So there's a big intrigue there if you like, especially for a guy like you who pays attention to technique and breaks it down. I feel like there's a lot of compelling reason to watch what he might be able to do.
I would have to agree with these guys. I think there is, you know, out of all the champions that could possibly deserve an immediate rematch, it's probably Jose Aldo. Just look at his history. But I would have to say I think there's a little bit of Jose Aldo fatigue, you know, in the fan base, just because we've seen him, you know, fight so many times and in all these title fights, and you know, the whole drama with Conor McGregor and the belts. I think a lot of people just wanted to see the featherweight division move on. I feel like with Jose Aldo, we're still there. Because what if he wins? We're still back in,
That's really it.
in some weird
That's a great
stage.
point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of Jose Aldo fatigue. I think people are really looking forward to that Frankie Edgar.
Well, you know where there's no fatigue, where there's no fatigue is in the possibility of seeing a really strong heavyweight contender. I mean, especially, you know, say what you will about all the weight classes in MMA or boxing for that matter, but when the heavyweight division has somebody who's fierce out there, and right now we've got a champion who looks like, you know, nobody can beat. Well, this might prove him wrong. This might be the one where we set up a heavyweight title bout that really means something and that people get real excited by.
So hang on to that because I want to get to it, but let me just circle back to this one final point about the card and its visibility. You don't hear a lot of consternation about what kind of pay-per-views this card is going to do. I haven't seen any discussion because I don't think people are all that worried about it. Like, here's the thing about rivalries, and look, they make fights bigger. The rivalry made TJ Cody much, much bigger. But here's the flip side of it. They're also kind of exhausting. They're exhausting to cover, they're exhausting to digest, they're exhausting even to witness. What's great about this card, in my judgment, is that we'll get to some of these individual storylines, but on top of that, it reminds me of UFC 206, the one you mentioned. We're going in, you're like, man, these are great fights. These guys are all handshaking at the weigh-ins, and they go in there and they blow each other's brains out. I'm kind of expecting that on Saturday night. Do you feel my read on that one?
100%.
Yeah, okay.
Well, look at those matchups. I mean, even going down the prelims, some of those fights, you're like, wow, that's got a chance to be something, a couple of those fights. I think that as the top 5 fights, I mean, honestly, if you look at all 5 of those fights, they all have potential to be really good fights. And I think that that's sometimes what you want in prospect, especially if you follow a sport as closely as we do, when you have the feeling like all of these, if things kind of go the way they should, all of these should pan out.
All right, so I asked each of you to tell me your favorite storyline coming out of this. There's a lot of different directions you can go. Jeff, I'll pitch it to you first. We'll go around the table. I'll go last. Okay. But which one, and look, there's no wrong answer here. There's a lot of really intriguing nuance to this card. Which one stands out to you the most?
Yeah, I kind of already tipped my hand. It's the heavyweight thing. I mean, I think the heavyweight division is such a starry division, and sometimes it seems to be lacking. I mean, you always hate when you see a heavyweight bout go into the second round because you figure these guys are going to tire out.
Diminishing returns at that point.
It's not the dance is going to be clumsy, but you get these guys who can go out there and finish somebody quickly, and and they're just the big dudes. I mean, there's something about those guys that if you can get a new one, a guy who's going to be up in that stratosphere, man, it's just like you got to grab a hold of it.
Danny?
I would say I'm very intrigued by the flyweight matchup between.
Well, hold on. Do you have any? Does everyone agree with Jeff first on the Ngannou point?
Yeah, man, I 100% agree with that.
Here's the thing about the Ngannou one. It's not really that heavyweight aspect of it, which is also intriguing. I mean, that you can end the fight in a flash, that these kinds of guys, these characters like Ngannou are rare. But on top of that, I've made this point before about Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think, unless they're doing crazy things on title runs, which is so rare, some of the best times to watch a fighter is as they make that 100%. First ascent to the title fight.
It's like, John Jones, when he was coming up, people talked about his wingspan. It was 84 inches. Well, Ngannou is the same. He has the exact same wingspan, but he's packing so much power in those. I mean, all of his fights have ended in a finish, and that's the kind of guy who they brought up just right. He's kind of incrementally been given more challenges. They threw him Andrei Arlovski, who's not, obviously in the twilight of his career, he's not who he was, but it was a big name and a big moment. He got by that. Now it's over him. To me, these are the way this is a natural escalation.
And that Arlovski fight was definitely a step up in competition for him. And what did he do? He knocked him out in about a minute and a half.
Right.
So that's impressive.
And the fight, Danny, is intriguing on its own right. It's not merely some narrative that we're placing on it in some kind of phony way. Their age difference is not extraordinary, but their experience difference is, and their skill sets are widely different too. I think Overeem is not the kind of guy who can go there in Dutch style, just bang it out, but he's very, very, very clever.
Yeah.
Ngannou is not quite as clever. He has not nearly as much time, nor does he have the kickboxing accolades. But when he brings the thunder, I mean, I don't want to use too many metaphors, but when he lowers the boom, it's night-night. It's an incredible contest.
Yeah, this is an amazing fight, and Ngannou's such a nice fresh air to the heavyweight division. It almost feels like he's needed to sort of bring that division back up. Because, I mean, he kind of reminds me a little bit when, Shane Carwin was coming up and just
totally
destroying people left and right. People were just like, okay, who's next?
Do you remember when he launched Christian Wellish's mouthpiece across the octagon with one shot? I mean, it's an insane level of power. Yeah. All right, so that brings us now to your favorite storyline.
Yes, I would say, I have several, but one that I'm very intrigued by is the flyweight fight between Sergio Pettis and Henry Cejudo.
Yep.
Because I felt like this big storyline in the flyweight division was that all these contenders were too green and were going up, to fight DJ before their time. That's been the history. We can name, tons of fighters that have just been thrown to the wolves against, Demetrius Johnson. But then you got Sergio Pettis, who, was supposed to fight Henry Cejudo, and at that time I felt like it was a bit too soon. But then Cejudo couldn't get to the fight, and then Pettis got the fight with Brandon Moreno. He got some experience. He got to main event the card. Again, more training on his belt, and now he's fighting Henry Cejudo, and this feels like it's the perfect timing. The perfect opponent, an elite, this doesn't feel rushed like it has so many times in the flyweight division. So if Sergio Pettis gets past Henry Cejudo, I feel like,
I like that it's also a three-man kind of game because either one of those guys has to kind of make an emphatic something, right? If they want to be the guy to go get Jimmy. Otherwise, almost by default, the pressure is going to be on Dillashaw, who then enters the picture.
Yeah.
Right.
Because everybody's dying to see Demetrius fight the guy who they're going to, there's going to be some doubt of the outcome. And I feel like Dillashaw right now provides that. However, if one of those two guys shows up and blows up the other, especially the way Cejudo looked in his last fight, if he replicates that and goes in there and does it again, I mean, suddenly you're looking at a pretty good fight. And if you get Pettis, I know his last 4 fights have all been decisions, but he's looked better as he's gone along. And I'm like, if he goes in there and emphatically does it, you're like, well, there's fresh blood for him too.
I feel like it's more so with Sergio because Cejudo in his last fight when he looked amazing, he's like, I would like some time off and get some fights under my belt before I go on and fight Demetrius Johnson. But Sergio Pettis just seems like this is the perfect moment. Like he needs,
Rose Namajunas,
like the elite at flyweight are Joseph Benavidez, obviously Demetrius Johnson, and Henry Cejudo. That's the elite, and you got to be one of those guys, one of those two guys to prove yourself. And this is the perfect time, the perfect matchup for him to do it. And I feel like if he does, that whole Dillashaw super fight, might be in jeopardy there if Demetrius Johnson wants to fight Pettis.
And wouldn't it be interesting if Sergio becomes the Pettis? I mean, Anthony Pettis has been like, he was on the Wheaties box.
Yeah,
And this is how much
Great
bigger
point.
do you get in MMA
That is weird.
than being on the damn Wheaties box? And then his little brother, who, kind of like his career was thrown into a big splash because he was Anthony's brother, but he wasn't really ready for it. And now look at him.
It's like the Diaz's.
He's built up.
I think his coach, Duke Rufus, has gone on the record and saying, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I remember him saying that, look, maybe they let Sergio into the UFC a little too early, took some time to get right, but you're right. He has been one of the few guys at flyweight who had an opportunity to really have a developmental process. Very intriguing. All right, Chuck, your choice.
Well, I mean, I love all these fights, but bottom line for me is, Justin Gaethje comes over, and the way he
Had to pick that one.
Of course, because I'm like, he comes over, and I think people were like, oh, this guy's this kamikaze. He goes in there and he doesn't care. He just invites you to hit his chin, but as long as he gets a crack at yours, he's fine. I mean, this is always going to be an aesthetically jaw-dropping experience with him, and he's had that a lot of times in a World Series of Fighting. His first fight with Michael Johnson, I just watched it a couple days ago again, and I was equally astounded because it's like he gets rocked a couple of times where you just think he's done, he's on toddler legs, he's going back, and all of a sudden here he comes again, and you're just like,
it's like a Rocky movie.
It is. It's completely nuts. And then he hits him with that uppercut, and you see him kind of, process it, and then it's like his poise returns, and he just goes in there and goes for the kill, even though he's exhausted. I'm like, to me, that guy, man, like, I'm glad that he's finally on a stage where we get to enjoy it and see him against these guys, because for a long time, you watch him in World Series of Fighting, and you're like, yeah, but what happens if he fights a guy who just hits harder, or a guy who just fights smarter with him, and things? Who knows? But he's finally facing him, and Eddie Alvarez being an accommodating sort after that Poirier fight. Yeah. To me, man, it's just, that fight just has. It could be spectacular, I think.
I think you nailed it in a way, because I watched that fight again also, and I remembered watching the beginning of the fight, and I remembered back to when I was watching it live, and I was writing that night, and as soon as I saw him in big trouble, I started writing sentences about how, this guy could afford to do this brawling in the World Series of Fighting, but once he gets to the UFC at that level, this is too big of a step up for him.
Till he defeats Truman.
He can't handle it, and then I'm like typing, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, let me erase.
He drops Michael Johnson, and the fight's over. All he has to do is kind of land on him, and it's over, and he's like, get up. And you're like, oh my God, he's going to dish out more. This is crazy.
Yeah, he has, I've talked about this before. Do you guys remember that climber? I forget his name. Is this skinny looking kid, looks like he would win American Ninja Warrior / be in the Trenchcoat Mafia. I forget his name, but he climbed El Capitan. Did you see this? Like the free climber. And this is a wall that in the climbing world was considered almost impossible to free climb. And he did it like with ease. And scientists have looked at his brain, and part of his brain is actually either a biochemical or some sort of structural issue with it, where he doesn't have nearly the same fear associated with risk, which they believe enables him to climb.
Right.
I think Gaethje is just like that. He doesn't. You ask him, it's like, did you get knocked out doing this? He's like, yeah. Like no other guy. Even action fighters are kind of like, after a while. Not this guy.
Right.
He's the Energizer Bunny. He just sort of keeps on going.
And I think it's interesting because this fight has the least story behind it. Really, these two guys are only fighting because they coach the Ultimate Fighter, but there's not a big feud or anything going on. But yet there's so much invested in that fight because everybody knows what to expect.
Also, a Bellator versus World Series of Fighting lightweight championship. Those are always fun ones.
Yeah.
I will come back to me. We talked a bit about it, the Jose Aldo thing and Max Holloway. Let me just say the two angles I'm looking at here, one for each guy. So we'll start with Max Holloway. Why am I intrigued by this? Well, of course, it's a title defense, but more than that, we talk about it, but we really need to say it explicitly. Max Holloway is part of the vanguard of elite fighters who are at the cutting edge of changing and innovating technique. He is doing things that other people ultimately copy. That's the kind of level of accomplishment we're talking about, not really what he has in terms of his scalps, but what he goes in there. Max Holloway and Demetrius Johnson are two of the most interesting ones to watch because you're going to see MMA not radically different each time, but innovated. The other side of the coin, we talked about Jose Aldo, and I want to pitch this to you, Danny, because I think this one's kind of interesting. So if Jose Aldo wins, you're right, it kind of complicates things. But let's talk about a scenario where he loses. If he loses, this will be 2 losses back-to-back. Let's assume he gets stopped in a relatively similar fashion. Now you know you don't belong at featherweight anymore. Or if you do, you're going to take fights that are consolation prizes. That is firmly entrenched Rich Franklin, Anderson Silva territory. So what are you going to do? Are you going to stay there and take bad fights? Are you going to go to 155? It would definitively spell the end of the reign of Jose Aldo as a featherweight.
It's interesting. Maybe he sticks around and gets some big fights, but I think he might. He does have history with Conor McGregor. I don't know. He might go up. He's talked about before. There was talk of Khabib and Jose Aldo before, and we know he's had issues with weight cutting. Maybe more towards like the earlier part of his UFC career than now. So I think it's very possible he can go up to 155. What I think about this fight that's very interesting is that we're seeing I think Max Holloway is in his prime, but at the very beginning stages. While Jose Aldo, I would say he's still in his prime, but very towards the end. So I'm really wondering what's better. Max Holloway's the beginning of his prime versus Jose Aldo's the end, the tail of his prime. And I think it's, in a way, although I criticize this matchup a bit, and the UFC had no choice that Frankie Edgar got injured, but in a way it's good because Jose Aldo would always linger there. I feel like the last fight turned the page, but I feel like this fight will close the book on Jose Aldo if he loses.
Here's the thing, though. You mentioned before, Danny mentioned before, Jeff, that look, there's some Jose Aldo fatigue. Now, interestingly, if Jose wins, first of all, that would be great for Conor McGregor. I mean, it would just be hilarious for him. But interestingly, I think it would go a long way towards reviving, I hate to use these terms, his brand. I think it actually would cause a degree of enthusiasm. Here we are talking about Max Holloway, how amazing he is. Look at the run. Look what he's doing. Look what he did to everybody. If Jose can get some redemption against him, wow, that would be majorly impactful.
Yeah, well, he also, I don't think he's made the excuse, but his coach has mentioned that Aldo was, had some injuries and really couldn't use. And what is Aldo's biggest weapon? Those leg kicks. So now he can unleash the leg kicks. And then conversely, Holloway said, yeah, well, the first time he threw a leg kick at me, I countered it with a fist. And Holloway has that body type where he is so long that he's one of those few guys who, most guys you can't punch against that kick because of the distance problem, but he's so big that he can do that. So yeah, you're right. I think for Aldo, he now has his best weapon at his disposal, presumably, and we'll see. I mean, if he can erase that loss, or at least kind of excuse it away by saying, "Well, I was injured that time. This is the real me," and we'll see if that comes through.
Interesting. All right, now we mentioned Conor McGregor because you just can't do a show without mentioning him, apparently.
Well, this is a record, 38 minutes in.
Well, 20 minus 16.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
so
right.
About 20 or so. Pretty good, right? Yeah. Pretty good. It's like holding your breath or something. Yeah. Okay. I don't even know what to say about this, but Conor McGregor, everyone knows the story, or the alleged story, I should say, that at some point on Sunday he goes into a pub or a bar or whatever in Dublin, allegedly in his home neighborhood of Crumlin, and gets into a bar fight with a number of characters of ill repute, or at least characters who have connections to characters of ill repute. It's really, we don't know because, one, there were no charges filed, there were no statements taken, there were some social media frenzy about it, but all the evidence thus far is circumstantial. Nevertheless, if you look at the way the Irish media is treating it, they're treating it with a decent degree of seriousness, including a famous crime reporter who had said that he believes that Conor McGregor is in danger. Okay. First, I like, part of me is like, I don't know whether to even talk about this because it feels like fake news. The other part of me also feels like it's, how do you say this? You know those movies that MMA fighters do? They go straight to DVD? This feels like a real life version of that, right? But maybe he actually is in danger. So Chuck, let's start with you. We don't really know what the situation is other than what I've just explained. But it does follow, if it's true, a pattern of very concerning behavior. What do you make of all of this?
I was talking to some guys at the Ringer, and they were saying, that he's crossed over to the Tyson zone, and people talk about the Tyson zone meaning that they can no longer do anything that will shock you. There's not going to be any behavior at this point. They've just reached a level of kind of the crazy antics and stuff that you're just, oh, what did he do this time? And you just absorb. That's kind of how it hit me, especially on the heels of this whole Bellator thing that just happened with the referee and Margaret and all that stuff. I mean, it's very weird because he's one of those guys, we've been able to kind of project how he's going to go up to this point in this weird way because you were following his own logic and he was making it happen. Now you get to this point where you're not sure what he's going to do and he's making some weird, these weird headlines and doing these weird things in Ireland, and you get a little concerned for sure because you're like, I think that when you see him in the Bellator, you can jump in the Bellator cage and disregarding authority there. I think that's maybe a general attitude at this minute. He thinks he's invincible. that's a little concerning. You know what I mean? And if this stuff is true of what he's doing, you know, he's punching guys he shouldn't be doing. Very, very, you know, it's very, very disconcerting. I saw that in Dana White's scrum, somebody was talking to him about this, and he was like, you know, and it was his answer that I was like, well, maybe he does know something more, because it was like, you know, but these things can be fixed. You know, they can be fixed.
Yeah, because what's his face, Jake LaMotta.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, it's a kind of a weird way to say, well, you know, it's not the end of it. It could be fixed. I mean, this is so who knows where the truth is on? I guess we'll find out as we go along here. But you hope, honestly, that he's got some good people around him who are going to ground him at some point, because right now it's a little weird watching him. You know what I mean? You're not sure. Like, I feel like he's that Tyson zone. You just don't know what's going to happen with him.
Yeah, and it's weird because like it almost feels like he's in a way he's like enjoying being kind of in trouble. I don't know. Like recently, I think it was today,
Yes.
he came out of a court because he had a speeding ticket, got there super late while he was posting on Instagram.
You see, he parked his car in a way that they couldn't move cars around it.
Yeah.
So he just pulled up and then got out of the car.
Which they give
Yeah,
him a ticket.
and then
Which is like, actually, I'm jealous. I wish I could do, but
he comes out, you know, like
Yeah.
covering his face, you know, our coworker, you know, Pete Carroll, in a reference to, I believe his name is
Cahill.
Cahill.
Yeah.
Is a famous, infamous, you know, Irish mobster who was assassinated in the 90s, and he stole art. He, you know, robbed, you know, jewelry, did a bunch of stuff, and you know, not
So
the
he's
best
paying
person.
homage to the.
And yeah, he was paying a homage to him, and you know, as he's driving away, he yells, "Reporters, come and get me!" and just like speeds away. And he's always sort of had this throughout his career. If we like look at the RDA press conference when he was gonna fight him, he was like, "I'm El Chapo," and you know, coming in, and he always has like Pablo Escobar references, and very
those are fun.
very gangsterish. Yeah, it's a bit silly, but whatever. So yeah, it's almost like, okay, it almost feels like he's sort of enjoying this. Like if he comes out and yells reporters, come get me, and he's laughing while he's like driving his car.
If it didn't happen on the heels of that Bellator thing, like
Yeah.
literally, what, a week apart or something, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't
Right.
think that but it's that erratic, like, so then you connect two erratic dots and you're like, whoa, this is getting a little weird, you know?
Yeah. I mean, press conferences, that kind of rhetoric is one thing, but when you start doing stuff in your life to act so really antisocially and putting out this air of invincibility and as though the rules don't apply to me, and also just kind of it just feels self-destructive. I mean, I really would not be surprised. You know, Chuck said, I can't surprise as well. Any news that comes out, if something happens to him, it would not surprise me now. I mean, really, it's just, you know, it makes me think a little bit about. You always read these articles about very poor people who win the lottery, and you think, wow, it's going to save this person's life. And then, you know, a couple of years later, these millions of dollars that they got are just all gone. These people are in misery, or they die, or something horrible happens, because people who don't have wealth a lot of times will get this sudden wealth, and it just kind of ruins their life. They aren't prepared to deal with it. Conor McGregor was on, you know, social assistance right before he joined the UFC, and now he's the richest guy in the sport by far. And it just seems as though he thinks he knows how to handle it, but he's showing that he really doesn't know how to handle it. The money, the fame, the celebrity, all that stuff is really overcoming him. And, you know, we think we have some problems with John Jones and some of the stuff that he's been doing. Well, this guy might prove to be a worse character in the end.
We'll see. I mean, again, we still don't really know what happened, which makes me temper my criticism a little bit. But I think Danny's onto something. Number one, I do think he's having fun. He reminded me, I know the Irish probably have their own way to interpret his actions at the courthouse today, but from my American perspective, did it not remind you of Tupac coming out of the courthouse with some kind of jersey on? And no, McGregor didn't spit at the cameras, but like to be young and cool and rich and to self-stylize as an outlaw and to parade against authority. Here's my read on this, Jeff. When he was coming up and meeting with Dana White and just, on the Marcus Brimage end of his career, I think he always felt like he was the smartest guy in the room, but not the most powerful. Now he thinks he's both.
Right.
Now he thinks he is the smartest guy. He knows what's best, and I have the wherewithal to pull that off. If he's having fun, and that's true, this is not the end of it.
Right. And look, the stuff with the Bellator cage, that could result in him being, suspended from the sport for a certain amount of time.
Well,
but
let's be serious. Nothing's going to happen.
Right. It probably,
Well, they did take him off UFC 290.
Yeah, right. They stuck it to him.
Nothing probably will happen in reality. But even if it did, the guy's got a ton of money. no big deal. The parking, the speeding ticket, showing up late, well, maybe the fine gets doubled or tripled, big deal. Or maybe he has to spend the weekend in a lockup. Not at the end of the world. But when you start messing around with wise guys, and I don't know much about the Irish mob, but I certainly grew up in this country. In this country, you do that to the wrong person, and it doesn't matter whether you're Conor McGregor. It doesn't matter if you have hundreds of millions of dollars. That someone's gonna walk up to you and mess you up. And so if that's part of the story is true, and again, you're like you said, it's just alleged at this point, but there's enough kind of circumstantial social media posts and other reports that make me believe that some of it has to be true. And if that is, man, he's messing around in a place where he really shouldn't be.
Okay, so last question on this, and then we'll move along. If I had to say on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your level of alarm? 1 having no alarm, 10 having like, oh my God, call 911. Where are you? I'm going to put my level of alarm 4 or 5. What about you?
I'm going to go higher than that. I'm not at the 10 place, but certainly the 7 to 8 place. I mean, I feel like this guy could be, this guy's trending in the wrong direction.
Danny?
I would say a 4 because I feel like a lot of it too is, like promotion and the way he carries himself. He wants to put himself like this invincibility sort of aura and this bad boy persona, and he sort of has all the time through his career, like throwing the bottles at the UFC press conference, taking the belt from Jose Aldo. He's always had this thing like, I'll break the boundaries, I'll break the rules or the norms. It is scary that he is allegedly maybe even getting involved with some mobsters and brawls or whatever. But I also feel like what Dana White said is partially true. I mean, this guy can't go anywhere without having a cell phone camera at least, like filming him constantly. And he's at a bar I'm sure people would be all over him, filming him, taking pictures of him. So if something did break out, I'm sure there'd be some sort of record of it. Again, I could be wrong, but I would say my alarm is probably out of 4.
I would say 5-ish. I would say that he carries himself a little bit like he's got the air of invincibility right now, which is a little alarming because you realize when you just have no idea, you don't care about authority. Not just will something bad come to him, but it also start to result in a spiral where people they don't care about him anymore. And I feel like that's one of these situations where you kind of guard against too. If from an MMA community, you're like, well, I hope he doesn't go too far down that because it's fun watching. It's fun having him involved in the sport and all that stuff. So you hope that some of this is just alarmist and a little bit, misconstrued and all that. But I would say that it's wait and see. So I'd put it around 5.
Let me just say one last thing because I saw some people defending it to whatever they said. I don't know how serious it is, but here's just a general rule for life. As somebody who has worked security in bars before, if you are fighting in a bar, you are doing life wrong, right? 5% chance that you got sucker punched, you got to defend yourself. The 95% of the rest of you are all instigating conflict for no reason. Just want everyone to know that.
Yep.
All right. So I wanted to place these two stories together because you have the Conor McGregor story, which is big, but you don't know how important it actually is, which is the opposite of the Ultimate Fighter 26. They're crowning a new champion, and it's as legitimate as it can be, all things being relatively equal, and yet I mean, you want to talk about a lack of buzz. I actually went up and looked at the Ultimate Fighter 20, which was the last time they crowned not merely a champion, but a female champion from the Ultimate Fighter. The debut episode, they re-aired on Big Fox. It wound up getting close to 3 million viewers between FS1, Big Fox, and
some other about Tough 20.
Tough 20,
okay.
Yes, Tough 20. Sorry if I got that incorrect. And I looked at the ratings. Now, just on FS1, it was about 500,000. But then I looked at the finale episode. It averaged about 1 million, peaked at about 1.3 million. I would be shocked if Friday's event gets 1.3 million. Here's the question, Jeff. I don't even know what to say. I don't know if it's incredibly pathetic or if we're being alarmist and this is just the way things are now. Where do you come down the fact that a UFC champion is going to be crowned on Friday and it is silent out there?
I come down on the side of this. The person who gets crowned on Friday is not going to be the UFC champion when the dust settles because the best 125-pound woman out there is already a UFC fighter. It's somebody in the 135-pound division or someone in the 115-pound division. The person who gets crowned on Friday night, first of all, I can't even tell you the name of either of the fighters. I know that one is 2-2 and the other is 3-2. So I'll say 2-2 versus 3-2. they're placeholders. I mean, I think that this says more about the
Skip Wagenheim over here with just firing out the takes.
Yeah, really. It's easy for me to say this here. No, I think that I feel as though this is kind of a little bit about the Ultimate Fighter. People are starting to recognize, fighters or maybe their camps are starting to recognize that that's not really the avenue to success in the UFC. That it's an unnatural way of competing, first of all. I mean, I didn't watch much of the season, but what I did watch was the last episode where one of the two fighters, the one who won actually, the whole narrative was about how she kept having trouble making weight because she kept having to make weight like every week or so, and this is not the way fighters compete. They also don't compete by living in a house with their competition. So all the things that this reality show forced the fighters to do, that really has nothing to do with how you're going to succeed as the ultimate the champion of that division. Look at the last time they did this, they had Carla Esparza come out of the house and wins the championship. Well, she's not one of the top people in that division. I mean, there are other people.
But she beat Nama Yunus, who eventually got the title.
Yeah, this is a good point.
And like several of those the castmates are on this Detroit card, up and down the card. So I mean, they're still all in there.
Yeah, I think all but Lauren Murphy and her opponent could.
I feel like in part, when you looked at Tough 20, they were unveiling a whole weight class at once, and they were telling you these are the best in the world. They're coming over. There were a lot of personalities in that house. Like, they kind of did a good job of bringing them out. I remember Felice Herrig was a big deal, like, kind of as an agitator, I guess, in the house. There were several others, like Angela Hill, people like this and Rose Namajunas. But the reason that we were talking about Rose Namajunas and these people is because it was still in the shadow of Ronda Rousey's height, like at the height of where she was at. We're unveiling the sun. Who's going to be the next Ronda Rousey? That was kind of a subtext in the whole unveiling of Tough 20. This one comes along, they've already introduced the featherweight class where there's literally one body that we know of, right? One legitimate 145er. And then now they're bringing in another weight class where it's going to be infiltrated, like you said, with the people surrounding it, that's they're going to find it. So this, and you're getting some of the retreads, obviously, that were on the on other show, they're on this show. So it's like you get into all these weird factors, and I feel like it just took something away from it. I felt like I should have paid attention more to it, just given that there will be a belt, but I don't regret it at all, given where we're at. I'm gonna watch the finale. Obviously, you're gonna find out who gets the belt, and you'll find out about this person that way. But honestly, it just didn't seem legit in the sense like you're really uncovering the best 125-pounder.
Danny, let me pitch this aspect of the question to you, which is, I agree with everything everyone said here, but just think about it in an abstract way. A UFC champion that has never existed before is going to be crowned on Friday. That should be must-see TV. That should be some kind of call to action for fans, and it hasn't been. You look around, you've got interim titles now. You've got Tony Ferguson, who might have to defend it because apparently the interim champion, according to Dana, doesn't have any expectation to fight the champion, which is just beyond bonkers. So what does it say about UFC titles? They're incredibly powerful. When fighters have them, they want to hold on to them. But there's this weird dichotomy where we just can't really get up for them, at least not automatically in the same way anymore.
I mean, all those interim titles that have been thrown out have definitely hurt the way fans look at championships. Before, it was whoever held the title was the baddest man or women on the planet. Nowadays, with stalling of holding of the titles, all these interim belts, I mean, you can make the case that, two of the interim champions right now, middleweight and lightweight, are really the best of their weight class and not, the actual champion. So, again, bringing in the titles, like, all right, well, what does that really mean? You made, a tournament, but, as Chuck said, there's still, probably Valentina Shevchenko will probably drop down to 125. A lot of people think she's the best, or maybe even Joanna Jędrzejczyk goes up. So I think that takes away from sort of the value and the significance of this whole event. What I also think hurts it is that, for example, we're talking about the Tough 20. We brought the UFC really brought a whole division, the top girls from Invicta, that they were already exposed and had a following on social media. Felice Herrig, Carlos Esparza, Rose Namajunas, all these fighters were very well known among the hardcore fans. These 125-pounders, perhaps not so much. So I think that also devalues, the meaning of that belt in this whole show. And
also, that the last time they did this, they were introducing a 115-pound weight class. That's a full 20 pounds away from the existing weight class. So, these were women who, because of their size, really couldn't legitimately compete against the 135-pounders on a consistent basis. This is a whole different thing. We're squeezing one in between two existing weight classes, And so no matter how you slice it, you're going to have people who are going to spill in from both sides. Now, even if this final tomorrow night had gone the other way, the two semifinal fights, the losers, Roxanne Modafferi and Barb Honchak, both those are somewhat recognizable names in the sport.
Yep.
They both were defeated by people who are seated in the house. I don't know,
like 14 and 12.
Yeah, 12 and 14, a 2-2 fighter and a 3-2 fighter. So really kind of played out in the worst possible way for the UFC. But even if it played out the other way, I still think that the ultimately the champion was going to be somebody who wasn't going to be from this show.
8 years ago, there were 5 belts. You know what I'm saying? Like it's been a crazy influx of belts.
So now what, there will be 11 on Friday?
Or 12, is it?
Or 12, I'm not even sure the number. There was 5 belts.
I don't know.
There were 5 belts basically, and anybody in those weight classes, GSP, Anderson Silva, these were like,
11.
They were people who they were there for a while, and you expect them to be there for a while. It's just it's a whole different ball game now. You know what I mean? Like, that some belts, if they're an interim belt, it just may change hands. And even in the real belts these days, the parity, how people come up and where they're at, you feel like it could change hands just like it did in the last UFC. 3 belts change hands in about an hour. You know what I mean? It's like, so I feel like it's the belts changing hands rapidly, but it's also the amount of belts. Some of them start to mean more than others. But right now, I don't feel like we automatically now revere a championship belt like we used to.
Also, it's something to be considered. UFC 218, the main card, is going to be behind a paywall, but it feels like the Ultimate Fighter brand now pushes content behind an enthusiasm wall.
Yeah.
Where
that's a good point.
You just in some ways, I would rather be behind a paywall than one where fans have just checked out on you and you're still running the motor. I don't really know how ultimately that serves your interests. Now, let's move along because time is a little bit tight. Dana White did a scrum with some select media sometime earlier this week. I actually found some points he made would be pretty good. I know it's fun now to reflexively insult Dana, which I can assure you 8 years ago when I was the only guy doing it, that wasn't quite so fun. But now everyone does it. But he made some good points, he made some bad points. But Chuck, let me go to you on this one. He kept talking in that very scrum. Joe Silva got money, he bounced.
Yeah.
Nate Diaz got money, he bounced. Well, it's like, well, Dana, you got money too. You haven't bounced.
I know.
But it feels like mentally you've kind of bounced a little bit. He didn't have nearly the same amount of fire or energy or just interest to spar that I'm used to, right?
Yes, you're right. It was. You mentioned like a bit of hypocrisy or something that he's mentioning, but there's so many like little pieces of that. I feel like that's what's fun these days because you can. And he may say one thing in one breath and say something the exact opposite in the next.
Right.
That's Dana White now, but I agree with you 100%. Like he's talking about money, and it's funny to hear him. Everybody now looks at him, I think, with this caveat of like, hey, listen, this guy just cashed out. What is it, $300 and some million, right? That's what, and he had already made a lot before that. So, that he's filthy rich now. He's filthy rich, and he's talking about these people who've made money, and that's exactly what you're thinking. Is like, yes, but you have made more money than everybody, or not to mention. So what are we doing? We're pushing these people toward these boatloads of money, like Conor McGregor. Okay, we're going to push you. We're going to keep talking like there's this big future with you and all this, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't know if he'll fight again. I don't even know if he'll fight again. What are we rooting for then? Why are we rooting these guys towards anything if we think that we're pushing them right to the spot where they don't want to fight anymore?
Great point.
It's so weird. There's so many different entanglements of logic now that I feel like you've got to just kind of obviously take everything with a grain of salt, but at the same time, kind of hear what you want to hear in a weird way. Like you just have to like kind of pick through it and stuff. It's just, I agree with you though 100% on his sincerity point. It's a different Dana. It was a little bit of like, oh yeah, this is what the scrums were like. Him casually making jokes and all this type of thing. But you felt like I just personally feel like he's not as he doesn't micromanage like he used to. He doesn't really care what the media say like he used to. He doesn't, you know what I'm saying? All those areas he's checked out. He's viewing it from afar now.
Even when he speaks truth or says something that I would agree with and probably you would agree with as well, there is this kind of hypocrisy that's underlying it. Like for example, he when the topic of George St. Pierre came up, he was saying, well, you've got to fight Robert Whittaker. He's the interim champion. He's the guy that's next in line. And of course, that's total truth. I mean, why would you create an interim belt if the first thing the guy doesn't do is to then go off and face the real champion? That's an obvious thing. So he's totally correct. But this is the same guy, Dana White is the same guy who would not say that at all with Conor McGregor, who
in the same scrum.
Right, who won 2 different belts and hasn't defended either one. So while he speaks truth, a lot of things that are unspoken that he refuses to acknowledge are just kind of hypocrisy.
Also, Danny, let me pitch the GSP thing to you. The other thing he said about the GSP one that kind of got me, and this is what I want to talk about in specific detail. He said about GSP, like, what are you going to do if he doesn't want to defend against Robert Whittaker? He goes, I'll be super pissed. And I'm like, and?
Yeah.
What is that? Okay, you'll be angry. Great. Yeah. Are you going to do anything about that anger, or are you just going to have emotions about it? It was almost a projection of power, and if you just look and listen for a second without any real notion of power.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And it's funny because, like, he's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be super pissed. And people are kind of waiting for him to say something else, like, oh, no, and then I'll do this and I'll do that. But there was, but there was nothing.
I'll be so mad at you.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think he's recognizing that he doesn't have the power over the fighters that he once did, that fighters are not going to necessarily just take any fight that's thrown their way, that fighters, even when it is a fight that they want to take, they're going to demand to be paid for it. Nate Diaz, being offered a fight with Tyron Woodley for the championship. Well, the championship doesn't mean anything to Nate Diaz. The championship to him is the championship. He wants a green belt wrapped around his waist. He doesn't care about this like brass and leather belt. He wants a bunch of dollar bills strapped around his waist, and that's what he wants. And that's the way fighters are starting to turn now.
You can make a green belt off marijuana as well.
Yeah, that's
the other way I was headed.
Yeah.
Or a laurel.
Yes, but let Chucko, to pitch it back to you just for a second here on the GSP side of things. He was sort of noting his anger or whatever. And what does that mean? So what do you read from that exactly? That they haven't punted on the idea of trying to shape this product, but ultimately it wasn't a cry for mercy exactly. But what was that? It was some sort of, I'm going to try and get fan sentiment on my side and lobby on behalf.
Maybe. Well, that was the old tactic, right? It was that you'd say something and create like
right.
Some kind
you hear what Dana said? He must be so right.
I just don't think it works that way anymore. And I think most people are going to probably side on some level with GSP through this, because the bottom line is we all talked about how weird it was for him to be a middleweight and that he should even been in that fight. And he wins against a guy who he's a champion who certainly deserved to be there, but he wasn't defending the belt against monsters, and then here came GSP. It wasn't something like that. So there was a lot of kind of turn the other cheek during this fight. And so now here he is with this belt. And in one way, I'm just like, man, I don't care if he gives it away at this point. He should go back to welterweight if that's what he wants. The dude's a legend in the sport. And I feel like that's where he made his name. There's compelling fights. If he goes and fights Tyron Woodley, I'd be like, I'm totally cool with that. Obviously, that's a nice fight. You could fight Nate Diaz. It wouldn't matter. Like, if they was just trying to make a novelty fight.
Ben Askren.
Yeah.
Ben Askren. He's still around, that guy? But they, to me, I feel like this sentiment goes sort of to GSP. Kind of what does he want to do? It seems silly to force him. I mean, I know it was in his contract on us, but in some ways I'm like, yeah, we knew all this language and stuff, but at the same time, you're like, you're going to force him to go to Perth? GSP has never done stuff like that. He's either fought in Montreal or Vegas, literally. You know what I mean? Those are the 2 places he went back and forth. He's not going to Perth to fight a guy for a title like that. Yeah.
And I think it symbolized a lot, like, everyone said, like, the loss of power of Dana White. Like, before, what Dana White said was Bible, was just the truth. People would just take it as whatever it was. But,
Us, the acolytes. We're like, yes, feed us.
Nowadays, it's not so much. And he understands, like, he doesn't perhaps have that much power. So he might say, okay, yeah, I'll be super pissed. But if, like, WME wants to make Conor McGregor versus GSP, like, it'll happen, it doesn't matter if there's, like, a clause on his contract that he has to defend his belt. I'm sure they'll work around that. So, yeah.
It was even different than what he said, you'll recall, before they came to terms about Mayweather-McGregor. He said he doesn't want to go down that road with us. Sort of, threatening, not exactly saying legal action, but you can kind of read between the lines. Now this time, I will be so mad. It's like, okay, Grandma, I mean, you can be mad. I'm taking the keys to the truck, whatever. So it was just kind of weird. Last thing on the GSP scrum, or excuse me, the Dana White scrum, because we are so short on time. It appears, thanks sweet baby Jesus, Jeff, it appears that the notion of Nate Diaz versus Tyron Woodley is dead. Let me say, we all want to see Nate Diaz back. We all would like to see Tyron Woodley defend his title. These would be great things, just not against each other. We had talked about this before. Do you share my sentiment that, yes, it's not great that we can't get a Diaz brother to compete because of their financial demands, whoever's wrong or right in that one, but I'm glad that fight has fallen through, to be honest.
Yeah, and this was another one that, and I think was part of the scrum where Dana White was calling into question why that fight would have been made, or why that fight would have been even proposed, because why would Nate be deserving of a welterweight title shot? And he's right. I mean, so this is another example of Dana White being correct, but because of his own past, he's kind of put himself behind the 8 ball, and guys can negotiate whatever they want to get. I agree with you. I don't want to see that fight. That's not a fight that deserves to be a title fight. I wouldn't mind seeing if they want to make some money and Woodley wants to drop down, say like he wants to cut down to 165, and they do a fight at that weight class with no belt on the line. Great, go for it. I mean, because really the biggest issue with those guys fighting is that Woodley's too big for him. So
it's just too much of a step. You keep removing the logic center of it, though. If he goes to 165 and then there's no belt in play, and then Tyron Woodley, why would we put Tyron Woodley in the position to do that? He's not. It's not like you're bringing like a big star champion into that situation. So it's.
But I don't think that Nate cares about. I don't think Nate cares about the belt.
Well, Nate doesn't for sure, but I'm saying, I feel like even Nate, his logic to even be in the conversation ties to Conor McGregor. So then we go, Tyron Woodley is in the. It's too many steps of logic to try to figure this thing out. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm just so glad this fight is not happening. when I first saw it on Twitter, I had that Opens MMA Twitter moment where like I walked in, I'm like, I just want to throw my phone. Like, what's going on? Like, Nate Diaz doesn't even deserve a title shot at lightweight. The only reason why he's getting one is because promotion. It's a big fight with Conor McGregor. Now, welterweight, that's just so far removed from reality and what we're like used to that, no, I don't want to see it. But like, people would make the argument, I bet you would watch. Well, yeah, I bet if my roommate ran into my room and go, Papito from the bodega's fighting the guy from the laundry, you bet I'd go out there and watch. That doesn't mean I want it to happen.
Papito definitely deserves a title shot.
So I really don't want that fight to happen. I'm so glad, it didn't go down. It makes no sense.
Having said that, I'm sure they've announced that fight during the takeover.
Yeah, I know. They're literally in the process of rolling out the artwork.
Keep Nate's giant frame at lightweight.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing before we go to Twitter, which we'll do in just a moment. There is a ton going on this weekend. There's a glory card. There's a bunch of submission wrestling matches. There are a bunch of fights. Bellator has an event that we haven't even tried to talk about.
Combate Americas Friday.
Claro. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. Let's go down the line. Danny, I'll actually start with you since you mentioned Combate Americas. What's one fight that you're looking forward to? It could be a wrestling match as well, whatever. What's one sort of combative bout you're looking forward to?
Oh, man, this is such an obvious one. It has to be the Gaethje versus Alvarez. I mean...
You guys have no imagination.
That one takes up all the imagination.
Yeah, it's just like we know what to expect from Justin Gaethje. And Eddie Alvarez, although he has been in some boring fights, the Pettis one, he does have a track record of being a very exciting fighter as well. And, these guys don't have any drama, nothing. You just know it's just going to be a really good fight. So I'm just really excited for that.
Probably Sam Celia is going to be fighting. No. That Paul Felder, he's kind of emerged. I think he's been a radar guy, and we've been like waiting for him. I feel like this is his big moment because he's getting that penultimate before the kickoff of the pay-per-view against Charles Oliveira, he's put on some good performances himself.
Back in lightweight?
Yes, exactly. So I feel like that has the chance to be a really good fight, and it could be a big, big moment for Paul Felder. I don't think he's won 3 in a row in the OC. This would be his chance, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Gaethje-Alvarez fight is going to be great, and the way I look at it is the only way that I'm going to be surprised is in a bad way, because I'm expecting so much fireworks that if it doesn't live up to that, I'll be very disappointed. So I'm going to say that the fight where I'm looking forward to something rising above my expectations is that heavyweight fight, because as I said earlier, heavyweight fights when they last more than one round, they tend to be kind of go into slow motion. So maybe we'll get like a really explosive first-round KO, or maybe we'll see something exciting. And whatever we're going to see, it's going to be somebody is going to emerge on the scene in the biggest weight class in the sport, and that's the one that I'm looking forward to.
All great choices. Yeah.
I would also like to add one. Probably the biggest superstar to come out of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Sean O'Malley fights against, I believe, Tyrion Ware is his name.
Correct.
Who's a very good striker, very technical guy. That should be a fun fight as well.
Another great call.
Torres Watterson too. So I mean, who is Torres Watterson?
Yes.
There's a lot of fights like that they really have the potential.
And there's no trash talk.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing. I'm going to say I can't believe any of you dullards did not mention that Tim Sylvia is actually competing at Submission Underground.
I didn't know they were competing.
Yeah. Well, yes. I don't know. I literally don't know who against who. It does not matter. I mean,
I think it's Butterbean.
Great, even better, even better.
Is this a Moosin?
Yeah, Mushin, it's funny. So Tim Sylvia, you should check that out for Submission Underground. I'm going to give Bellator a little bit of love since this has been a UFC show. Rafael Lovato Jr., the only American, or I should say the first American to win the Brazilian Nationals in his weight class, then in open weight, and the third American to ever win the World Championships at the black belt level. That's the only one that counts. I mean, if you're winning at a purple belt, you're a good purple belt, but you're not a world champion, right?
Yep.
He got it at black belt. He is returning to the cage against Chris Honeycutt, who was a national runner-up at Edinburgh. I did a long preview with him years and years ago. I don't think Honeycutt has quite developed at the pace everyone thought they would, and Lovato's about 34, so if he's going to get it done, it has to be now. He can strike. Boxing was his first love. I am very, very, very much looking forward to that on Friday night, so check out Rafael Lovato Jr. Okay, so now here's what we're going to do. With the time we have remaining, we're going to end this program, but the show, in a manner of speaking, goes on. In just a second, you're going to go to MMAfighting.twitter.com. If you want to send us a tweet, you may, using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We'll take your questions, we'll take your comments, your gripes, your smart remarks, whatever you have to say. So we're going to end this here, but in just a second, we're going to be right over there. So let's do this. Let's end this program. Join us now on MMAfighting.twitter.com. We will see you over there in seconds.